Hello and welcome to HSM 430. For today's class, we are discussing systems thinking, and there are three learning objectives to explore this topic as in depth as possible. The first is to describe what a system is and describe what system theory is. And then we're going to discuss the concept of healthcare as a complex system, and then finally describe the components of healthcare as a system. So starting with system theory, what is a system? So the definition we have is that a system is a set of related parts that work together in a particular environment to perform whatever functions are required to achieve the system's objectives. So this is a lot of words, but what do they mean? So to kind of explain it, I'm going to use southeastern Louisiana as an illustration of what a system is. So in this example, the objective of southeastern Louisiana can be found in the system, in the mission statement and this mission statement says that the institution is working towards leading the educational, economic, and cultural development of Southeast Louisiana. So the related parts of this system would be the various programs that it has, the undergraduate program, the graduate program, and then the different colleges and departments that SLU has. Now, the function itself will have to differ on what it is that each of these different parts are performing. An example would be the health system management program, of which the function is performing is teaching students how to focus on outcomes in a healthcare setting. So all of these functions that the different parts are performing all work towards in achieving the objective of the system. So to understand what system theory is, you need to understand that the principle behind system theory is that in order to understand the properties of a system, you need to study the totality of the system. So to make sense of what Southeastern Louisiana University is, you need to understand the programs that understand the mission statement, understand the programs that the school has, as well as understand the functions those different programs perform. So you're looking at to do this, there are a couple of things to consider. You look at wholeness. With wholeness, it's saying that the system itself is more significant than the individual parts. So to understand Southeastern Louisiana University, you are not going to just look at the departments or just look at the functions of some of the departments. You have to look at the system as a whole. It's more significant than looking at some individual parts of it as a way of explaining the system. Then you also have to look at whether there is clear structures that are in place, and these structures are necessary for the system and its different parts to be able to function. So organization is a key component of system theory. And then we have dynamics, and dynamics is looking at the interaction that the system is having with its in all those parts that it has. But it's not just about whether those systems are, the systems are having these interactions, but these interactions need to be adaptive in the sense that it needs to be able to change or mend or modify based off on the requirements that's in order to meet whatever the environment is asking for. You would notice that most organizations, especially those that have been around for like ever, their mission statements do not remain the same today as it was at the onset of the organization. The reason being that the organization is adapting to its environment. So that is how it is with a system. And then you also have to look at the primary activities of the different parts that are doing. So they're not going to be homogeneous in the activities with the system, especially a system that has multiple different parts. They are not going to behave exactly the same way as each other. I'm still using Southeastern University as an example. The way that, let's say, the maths department teaches its students is going to be quite different from the way that the social work program teaches its students. So you will have inherent behaviors that are independent of each other within those individual parts. And then finally, we have the equifinality, which is that all of the different things that are happening within the individual parts, they are all geared towards achieving the goal of the system. And there's going to be more than one way to achieve that goal. There's no one singular way that if things happen this way, then this goal will be achieved. If it doesn't, then everything goes awry. So that is a principle of equifinality. So now going into the attributes of a system, there are different types of systems. We have a simple system. The nature of a simple system is that the component parts interact linearly to produce a very predictable outcome. Usually, simple systems can usually they kind of on the technology or engineering portion of it. I'm going to use an example of a TV, right? The purpose of a TV is to be able to transmit images and transmit sounds back to the viewer, the people who are watching, and the component parts are quite very linear in the way you produce this result. Plugging the TV into a source of power, putting a battery into your remote and press the remote, and your TV comes on. So it's quite linear in the way those different parts are interacting with each other to produce its outcome, and its outcome is for the most part very, very predictable. With complex systems, things get a lot more complicated. The reason being that there are usually multiple components of it, and the way that they are relating with each other is very, very complicated, is non-linear, and is often unpredictable. I'm going to use an example of an elementary school, for an instance. So you have different components of it here, being the teachers, the students, the administrators. So the way the teachers relate with the students is going to be quite different from the way the teachers relate with the administrators, or they relate with themselves. Also, the way the students relate with each other can also very differ based off on the grades of the students. So you have very non-linear interactions that are going on, and they can have very unpredictable results based upon how things are all functioning in that. So what systems thinking then does is that it encourages using critical thinking with a multifaceted inquiry to be able to identify patterns of what is going on in a complex situation. Still using the school as an example, you can't understand how a school is functioning if you're only talking to teachers, or if you're only talking to administrators, or if you're only talking to students. You have to be able to do a multifaceted inquiry in order to identify the patterns of what is going on as a way of understanding that system. So, and also it's very important to recognize that there is ripple effects about in what happens in the system if something changes in one component of the system. Let's just, for example, if teachers are taught to teach in a different way from the way they are teaching, things are going to change in terms of student performance. They may perform better, they may perform worse, and a lot of these outcomes can be very, very unpredictable, and hence the reason why there is feedback loop that has to be incorporated in the system as a way of understanding or recognizing the patterns of what's going on. So there's the attribute of a system that helps people think through what's going on. We have dynamic system, and to help in achieving dynamic system, you are needing to ask questions from these items, One of the questions says, look beyond specific events to determine the cause of a problem. So you have to look beyond just one event. Let's use, for example, if you're trying to understand why students are coming late, you're going to look beyond what time the students are coming to school in order to understand the cause of the problem. Also, part of dynamic system is thinking that the system is constantly changing. If anything changes in the system, it has a ripple effect. So you need to understand where things started and what the ripple effect is, because you could be only examining the ripple effect and not the cause of what triggered it. So it's very important. With the holistic perceptive, you are looking at asking questions such as I keep in mind that proposed changes would affect the whole system, because all the components of the systems have effect on other. There is knock-on effect. When you change one thing, it's that ripple effect that I spoke about, it affects everybody. So bearing that in mind, the other attribute that says seeks to identify patterns. Some of the questions to ask or items from systems thinking to look at is, I seek everybody's view of the situation, because this way you won't really understand how it's going if you're not having this multifaceted identification of patterns or inquiries. Then lastly, with transformative attributes, some of the items in systems thinking is looking at, I consider relationship among co-workers in the work unit. Is also looking at, I try strategies that do not rely on people's memory. So memory, by its nature is quite unreliable. There's this thing we'll call recall bias, whereby people end up remembering things in a different way than it actually happens. So when you are having your inquiries, you're having your investigation, you need to have strategies that are not solely relying on memory. So having some form of objective way of understanding the system does help. And some of the times things like school records and stuff like that do help in doing that. So what are the elements of a system? You have the input, you have the throughout process, and you have the output. But this is not where it ends. Remember where I talked about the feedback loop. This feedback loop happens by going from the output and back into the input, so that this way the cycle continues as a way of having this dynamic interaction that is happening in a system. So I'm going to use an example to demonstrate how input, output, and feedback happens. So let's say that there is a school in which a problem was identified to be that students are failing courses, and they're failing it at a higher rate than is typical. Let's say in the last 5 years they've been failing at maybe 5% rate of the entire school, and then suddenly they started failing at 6%, 7%, 10%, 11%. So you'll know that there is a problem, because typically it kind of stays between 4 to 5%. If suddenly moved to 15%, then there is a problem that needs to be investigated. The input here would be conducting an investigation to discover the why and how this failing is happening and where it could be coming from. The throughout process would be to interview students, interview teachers, interview administrators. The output here would be, after all the interviewing has, taken place, identifying that students, let's say, the result of that is that the investigators identify the students who are feeling unmotivated to perform well at tests, and the reason they're feeling unmotivated is because they think their future is bleak, and so therefore it doesn't really matter, putting in all that effort into learning, because it's not going to get them anywhere. So that's going to be the output. Now the feedback loop would be for the investigators to write a report of the findings of this investigation and then suggesting to the school administrators ways in which they can motivate the student. And this feedback then feeds into a new input, which would be the school introducing a career coaching seminar as a way to motivate students. And then the cycle continues, because this is an input, but the school still needs to know whether this career coaching is actually going to lead to increase in, decrease in failure rates. And then if it doesn't, you go through the whole cycle of trying to investigate input, output, feedback loop, and all that. So that is why the system is very dynamic and tries to adapt to its environment. So we're going to talk about the components of a system. The components of systems that was identified by the World Health Organization includes leadership and governance. It includes health information system, human resources for health, health financing, service delivery, and healthcare products. So the World Health Organization is saying that in order to understand the healthcare system, you need to look at all of these individual parts of it as a way of making like a totality of an understanding of what the healthcare system is. So the healthcare system is very, very complicated, as you can see with all of these components. It is unlikely for it not to be complicated. So this author said that the healthcare system comprises network of components, using an example of hospitals, clinic, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, and they interact in a non-linear way in different scale. Let's say the way patients are relating with rehabilitation units is going to be quite different from the way they're relating with nursing homes or patient homes. And you have also the medical centers maybe relating in a different way with the government from the way they're relating with the families. So, and all of this multi-linear and unpredictable interactions produce unintended consequences like adverse drug reaction, and can also produce intended consequences like patients getting well after treatment. But it's very, very important to always put into account, take into account unintended consequences. So another way to look at system and to understand the complex system is to look at it from an individual perspective. And according to this researcher, it says that healthcare providers need to, as individuals, gain understanding of the intended and unintended effects of patient-centered care on the healthcare systems as a whole. So you need to have, as an individual, have a good understanding of this. And then also as a team, the healthcare provider needs to promote interprofessional teamwork and seeking input from these interprofessional teamwork teams, and also from other stakeholders and from patients as a way of improving the healthcare system. And then on an organizational level, systems thinking results in there being changes in the way an organization runs, and it can happen from strengthening organization, having more evidence-based decision making, or fostering clinical reasoning. So these are all the ways that we can think about systems thinking in a real life situation. So I'm going to use an example of diabetes management program to illustrate systems thinking in this case. So let's see, we have all of these specialists that are involved in a diabetes management program. We have the healthcare physician, we have the patients, we have the family, and the dietitian, and all of these different specialties have, achieving different results. All of these people who need to be a part of an interprofessional team, but they also need to be trained in systems thinking as a way of understanding that one advice that one person gives can have a knock-on effect on the on the patient or the environment. Let's use, for example, if the dietitian says to the patient, you can't eat rice, for an example, and in the patient comes from a community where rice is a staple meal for them, you have left a problem for the patient, because now, being that they can't eat rice, it will be very difficult for them to participate in the community, because everybody else is going to be eating rice minus them. So you've kind of having to separate them from the community, where they are no longer a part of the community as they used to be. So there has to be an understanding with the dietitian, not just looking at the patient as, the person sitting in front of me, but the patient as a part of a family, as a part of the community, knowing that whatever advice I give to this patient is going to have a knock-on effect. For example, a patient who was told not to eat rice, and by so doing is going to sort of alienate him away from the community. That patient is not going to avoid rice for a very long time. They're probably going to do it for the first few months and suddenly start feeling lonely or as an outsider to the community, and they will decide, do you know what, I would rather eat rice than to be isolated from the people that I love. So that is something that members of the interprofessional team need to think use system thinking when they are interacting with patients, their families, and their communities. Otherwise, it becomes a problem with adhering to medical advice. So this is where we end for today's class. Please use the Q&A board for any questions you may have, or if there's any place that you may require further clarification, and I will answer the question. Do you have a lovely day. Bye.